Good afternoon, and thank you for joining HighSide and NDC for today's Information Security Best Practices webinar. Today's focus will be on the security, or rather insecurity, of traditional collaboration platforms, voice and video services, file sharing and cloud storage applications. And isn't it funny that we're doing this on Zoom? We all know these tools, from Microsoft Teams to Slack to OneDrive, but do we know the data security challenges they present? My name is Evan Blair, and I'm the Chief Revenue Officer here at HighSide, and I have the distinct honor of being your moderator today and introducing my esteemed colleagues who will be presenting the meat of the content today. Before we get started, though, a little housekeeping. Today's session will be recorded, and we'll be distributing it to everyone here and those that couldn't make it today via email. We also will be following up with each of you individually as we have some very exciting offers for those in attendance. But I'm not going to spoil a surprise. You'll have to stick around to the end to learn more about those offers. When you receive the recording, please feel free to share the session with your colleagues and industry peers. I'm not sure that your significant others are going to find it as interesting as we will, but feel free to share it with them as well. Now, since we have a big audience today, we're going to keep Q&A to the Q&A tool built into Zoom. So unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to open your mics, but if you have a question, please use the Q&A tool at the bottom bar or top bar, depending on how you have your Zoom set up, to submit your question, and we will answer as many of them as possible at the end of our presentation. If we don't have a chance to answer your specific question, we will reach out via email to ensure you get an answer. Now, today's session will have two parts. The first part will be delivered by Ian Fielding. Ian is the founder and director of NDC Certification Services Limited. NDC Certification Services Limited specializes in ISO certifications for industry. Ian is an information security specialist and an ISO 27001 lead auditor, as well as a member of the International Institute of Safety and Risk Management, or IIRSM. Ian will be giving us a framework to think about security, and we'll dive into why we should all be using an information security management system and how to go about getting certified. The second part of our talk will be led by my colleague, Aaron Turner, with a brief introduction by yours truly. Aaron is the founder and CSO, or Chief Security Officer, at HighSide. Aaron's a serial security entrepreneur. Trust me, that's a good thing, not a bad thing, and recognized as one of the most influential cybersecurity leaders of the last 20 years. Aaron also brings decades worth of experience working with the United States government, Microsoft, and many other large and influential technology companies, has a very unique perspective on secure communications due to what I would call a colored past that has taken him around the world in pursuit of security and secure communications. Now, let's get started. I'm going to turn this over to Ian to kick us off. Ian, take us away.
Thank you, Evan, for that kind introduction. And thanks to all of our attendees for taking the time out of their busy day to listen in on our webinar event. In this presentation, I'd like to highlight how information security management systems can help organizations large or small to manage information security risks. At the same time, I'll look to explain some of the key features of an information security management system and why I believe business owners and those responsible for risk management should consider the implementation of ISO 27001. In this presentation, I'll discuss the framework around ISO 27001 and hopefully clarify some of the main considerations for those of you who may be looking at 27001 as a framework to manage risk for the first time, or for those who may be looking to integrate 27001 into an existing ISO standard or as an integrated management system. And don't worry, if you're not familiar with any of the ISO standards, this presentation is aimed at those among us who are not technical experts. Next slide, please, Evan. Simply put, ISO 27001 is a framework in which to manage information security risks. But how do we define information security? How do we ensure ISO 27001 is right for our business or organization? because information security can mean different things to different people. For some, it may be that you want to protect intellectual property, patents, designs, or company data and networks. For others, it may mean protecting your IT assets. It may relate to customer information, data, or the use to be used as a competitive advantage when going for contracts or tenders. ISO 27001 will help your organization to protect the assets you value the most. It's designed in the same way as many other ISO standards, such as 9001, the quality management system. The framework is almost identical, clause 4 through to clause 10 being the same, which is broken down into individual clauses. Context of the organization, leadership, planning, support, operation, performance, and continual improvement. It's based on Annex SL, the high-level structure, and is built around the plan, do, check, act cycle. So for those organizations who already have adopted ISO 9001 to manage your quality assurance objectives, 27001 will help you to manage your information security objectives. You'll often hear the term confidentiality, integrity, and accessibility, or CIA, when talking about information security. That's because ISO 27001 refers to these terms throughout the standard. We need to consider the risks posed to an organization and the stakeholders in terms of financial, reputation, and commercial damage. We need to consider the likelihood and consequence of a data breach or hack and understand how such an attack may affect your employees, customers, or critical suppliers. So let's take a look at a few considerations when assessing the information security framework and assessing the IT landscape. Next slides, please, Evan. You can see from the diagram that information security is a continually evolving process. Many of you will be familiar with some of the terms on this slide. The problem is we often look at each area in isolation when thinking about information security. We know from experience that IT systems don't work independently. They're fully integrated. In fact, they're interconnected throughout the entire business. Information security will require you to take an in-depth review of your entire IT ecosystem and to identify how it relates to your businesses in both internally and externally. We need to consider our contractors, suppliers, outsourced operations, our policies, and the devices we use. We need to understand what our access controls mean, monitor software maintenance and updates. We need to review our policies around information security and the whole IT infrastructure. Traditionally, IT security has always fallen squarely in the lap of the IT department. Often, when asking the question of senior manager about IT controls, I often hear that same answer after a long pause: it's down to the IT department. We've all heard that one, right? Well, information security is not the job of the IT manager alone. Sure, they play a vital role, but they're not compliance officers, risk managers, or magicians. They fix systems, they manage networks, and they keep your email and PC going. It's really important to involve people from a non-IT background when looking at your information security objectives. We need to ensure you have a diverse level of experience in areas such as operations, procurement, HR, compliance when holding IT meetings. We need to involve the executive team, get their buy-in, as this will help the organization to develop more of a strategic approach to risk management when it comes to information security. It's very easy to lead yourself into a false sense of security, that your information security and cyber controls are effective. That is, until you get hacked or become a victim of invoice fraud. Getting everybody involved will help top level management to ensure that they don't have a tunnel vision approach when assessing the threats. We need to monitor the peripherals and not simply focus on the obvious like passwords and email security. As important as they are, infosec is a bigger conversation than just physical controls. We need to know the knowns, the unknowns, and the known unknowns, as Donald Rumsfeld once put it. We need to understand how the business works. We need to identify the core activities and service offerings of your business. Take production, for example. Consider how your machines talk to the network. Is plant equipment included in pen testing? Has the OEM or manufacturer released updates or firmware or patches? Do IT even know about these updates? Does your IT department talk to production? Is your production environment vulnerable to attack? Outsourced to others? What's the threat from within? How do you begin to identify threats? These are just a few of the questions that need to be asked of ourselves when looking at information security in the broader sense. We need to look at our training and competence and the skill sets of your team. And we need to ask ourselves, is it where it needs to be? What are the skills gaps and how do we plug them? So you can see that ISO 27001 is not simply an IT related standard. It's a mechanism to identify risk and a vehicle to drive improvement. And let's be honest, the Internet of Things has brought many benefits: greater connectivity, rapid deployment of remote workers, collaboration through things like Microsoft Teams, video conferencing, and shared drives. But there is a flip side to the coin. With the rapid deployment of new technologies, we run the risk of exposing ourselves commercially. We need to assess information security and cyber risks in the same way you manage your health and safety or environmental risks. So get everybody involved and build a team of people with those diverse skills. It will only enrich and improve your information security performance. Next slides, please, Evan. Okay, so putting in an ISO management system can be a daunting task, especially if you haven't worked in an IT or come from a non-technical background. You may not be familiar with the ISO management systems. Thankfully, most ISO management systems are designed in a way that is aligned with most business structures. ISO 27001 will help your organization to assess the level of risk, identify potential vulnerabilities, and develop robust information security controls. It will demonstrate to stakeholders that you're taking information security and cybersecurity seriously. And let's face it, we need to get serious. Attacks on our networks are growing at an alarming rate. I know Aaron will be covering this in more detail next, but please be under no illusion. The risk of an attack is very real. Next slide, please, Evan. So where do you start? Our recommendation is you conduct an information security gap analysis. Our ISO 27001 gap analysis service will enable you to assess the level of maturity and effectiveness of your information security controls. We will conduct a sample audit of your information security policies, have a discussion with your IT managers or providers to better understand the challenges you face and identify any potential areas or opportunities for improvement. We will examine the organization as a whole. We won't just be focusing on IT, but cover all departments from accounts to payroll, production to HR. Once completed, we'll produce an audit report that will detail our findings and set out a roadmap to ISO 27001 certification. Once you have implemented your infosec management systems, you can book your stage 1 audit. Stage 1 is a review of your top level documentation, and subject to passing, you'll be recommended to stage 2. Stage 2 is all about operational control, to check your policies and protocols are effective and understood throughout the organization. NDC certification services can support you through your journey and recommend consultants to help if required. I hope this short presentation has been of interest, and thanks for listening. I'll now pass you over to our host, Evan. Over to you, Evan.
Thanks, Ian. I appreciate it very much. So in the interest of time, I'm going to blow through my quick introduction and get to the really exciting stuff that Aaron Turner has to talk about. It's the sexy hack content that everybody wants to hear. Look, one of the things that I wanted to talk about was that for years, for maybe the better part of a decade, businesses of all sizes and across all different industries have been contemplating and discussing digital transformation and trying to figure out how they move their organization into kind of that digital environment. And there were plenty of options and plenty of technologies out there, but they all really represented a lot of different security challenges. And we saw very slow rolls in deploying and implementing some of these things, and especially when we're talking about critical, sensitive, confidential materials, data, and business functions. But COVID changed everything. I mean, it's changed every facet of our lives, but it's certainly changed the digital transformation conversation. Just looking at one statistic, the number of active Microsoft Teams users, which is a collaboration platform, as you guys are most likely aware, it skyrocketed overnight. Businesses had no choice but to push the button on a digital transformation that had not been thought out, had not been planned, that security concerns, data integrity concerns, access management concerns had not been vetted. And honestly, a lot of those concerns were known, but they didn't have a choice. They had to keep the lights on. They had to keep working. This introduced a significant amount of issues. Those issues resulted very prominently in some major data breaches, hacks, compromises. We like to talk and laugh about Zoom bombs that happened kind of in the beginning of the pandemic when everybody was hosting their executive leadership meetings, cabinet meetings on the platform. But the reality is that is certainly a big vulnerability, but something that is just the tip of the iceberg. One of the reasons, though, that these platforms have introduced so many problems to organizations is because they have built-in insecurities. These platforms are mostly designed around kind of consumer focus, with a prioritization on usability and no thought to the security controls that are necessary for an enterprise application. So think about that, right? And think about some of those challenges, and think about these tools and how they're used in your organization today. And so to really drive home the point and really make this very real for everyone here, and why HighSide is in business, and why our customers are looking for a new way through. A new way to enable their business to collaborate, to share, to engage in a distributed workforce environment. They need to do it securely. And I'm going to pass the ball over to Aaron Turner to talk about a hack that here in the United States has gotten significant play in the mainstream media, but not so much in the UK, which it should. So get ready, hold on to your seats, and don't forget that you and your data and your users are squarely in the crosshairs. This is not somebody else's problem. This is your challenge.
Yeah, so actually, Evan, would you go back to that slide that has all the different cloud providers? There's maybe 3 slides ago that has kind of all the array of the stuff that's out there. So here's one of the things that I try to do in these webinars is give someone actionable guidance. So here's the actionable guidance you can take from this slide. If you're using any of these platforms to collaborate, when you get on them, like I am right now, I'm on Zoom, you should assume that you're speaking in a public place. Anyone can, there's a wide variety of people that can intercept and record the communications that are flowing through these platforms without your knowledge or consent. And so the best thing to do when you're on Teams, when you're on Zoom, when you're on WebEx, is to have in the back of your mind, I am speaking in a public place and I don't know who's going to be recording it. So there's sort of one key takeaway. So Evan, if you'll flip back to the DarkHalo slide. So if you think about the movement of operational IT out of centralized data centers on-premise into cloud environments, it's been a sort of a slow movement up until March of last year, where it was just this gradual push. People were slowly getting away from on-premise Exchange, moving towards Microsoft's Exchange Online environment. Well, what happened with the pandemic is that migration moved. That chart that Evan showed about Teams usage, same thing happened with Exchange Online, SharePoint Online, all of the Microsoft services that are offered there. Well, in conjunction with that, there were a series of events that motivated some sophisticated adversaries to burn through potentially one of the largest arsenals of cyber weapons I've ever seen in the last 30 years of my work. Basically, you're seeing a situation where, and the reason why I think these sophisticated adversaries, so the Washington Post attributed to the Russians, I think they were part of this. I think the Chinese probably did some copycat stuff. North Koreans were probably involved. This was think of it as a group attack, right? Not necessarily they're collaborating with each other, but they were watching each other exploit these vulnerabilities and coming in and floating through each other's exhaust trails. And so what you're seeing right now is this burning of exploits. And in my opinion, this happened because the physical human assets that the North Koreans, the Chinese, and the Russians had in place inside of US government, inside of US entities, were no longer able to go into the office. And as a result, they didn't have the ability to put their thumb drives in servers and do that sort of thing. There are real human assets involved in this type of cybersecurity operation. And because everyone was forced to work from home, they had to burn these exploits to say, how can we get in and get past the fact that we no longer have our physical human assets that can access these locations? So there's sort of one motivation of why they decided to burn all of this. The next one was opportunistic. Because so many people were working from home, they were able to float through the dust of all of these people working from anywhere. And by turning off certain logging, they could essentially hide in plain sight. I work with an organization called ISMS Research. It's a boutique consultancy that looks at information security problems. And we with them did a survey of over 80 of the members of the Fortune 500. And less than 8 of those organizations had any clue how to monitor for DarkHalo style attacks. They were completely unprepared. They had moved into the cloud without the appropriate controls. And so let's take a look at the complexity. Next slide, please. So if we think about the complexity that was involved here, this is a map that's called the MITRE ATT&CK Framework Map. And this is an enumeration of all the different tools and techniques that were involved in what we in the hacker world are calling the UNC 2452 attack, which is this combination of SolarWinds, the FireEye tools, the VMware Workspace ONE exploit, the dual MFA bypass, resulting in Microsoft 365 privilege abuse. And this represents the way that they went and did reconnaissance to understand what they could steal, gained access to sensitive bits of data, used Microsoft 365 native tools to exfiltrate that data to bypass security controls, to turn off logging and monitoring to make sure that their activities could not be detected. And each one of these red boxes in that eye chart that's there on the slide represents a particular action within this MITRE ATT&CK framework. If you're not familiar with the MITRE ATT&CK framework, I would highly recommend, as was being mentioned by Ian before, you may take a procedural-based approach like ISO that helps you think about things in the big picture. The MITRE ATT&CK framework is what helps you prioritize things at a tactical level to make sure that you're actually implementing controls. And so if you're prepared to deal with these things, then at that point, the potential for losing data is much lower. Now, the downside is that most organizations are not properly resourced to deal with the sophistication of this attack. And so at that point, you have to ask yourself, am I really ready to stand up to this? Or can I do something strategic to stop it? So let's take a look at just how complex some of these attacks were. If you'll go to the next slide, please, Evan. So right here, you see what is called infrastructure as code. So when you sign up for Office 365 or Microsoft 365, you can go in and configure your user to do their certain things. Well, a lot of people, especially lay people, would say, well, I'm using the Office portal or the Azure portal to go and configure those things. And those are user interfaces through the web. But in reality, those web user interfaces only represent a small portion of what can be configured through these infrastructures code interfaces. What you're seeing on the right here are screenshots of the code that exists for particular users in the environment. Through the last 3 years of research and development, I've been working with an organization that has found over 7,500 different potential settings for each user in Microsoft 365. So if you think about you're running an organization with 10,000 users, holy free holy, that's millions of settings you got to keep track of. And that's not the logging data, that's just the configuration data. And so if you take a look at this complexity, very few organizations have the skill set to go and understand the operational reality of these things. And so while Microsoft 365 might be good for doing general purpose business collaboration, probably in most cases, organizations who need to protect critical intellectual property, they are not in a good position to defend themselves to manage this level of complexity on an ongoing basis. Also, Microsoft has done a pretty poor job of providing documentation, right? They have not done a good job to educate their users to make sure they understand this level of complexity. And so when we think about the complexities involved, the motivations of the bad actors, and then the opportunistic stuff that's going on, that's sort of the Bermuda Triangle of badness that we've got there. And it could represent some significant problems. So next slide, please, Evan. So if you think about what Microsoft 365 was designed for, it was designed for maximum knowledge worker productivity and, oh, by the way, maximum shareholder return to Microsoft. How can Microsoft monetize this to its best extent? It was not designed for resistance to sophisticated adversaries. It was not designed to protect your data from global administrators. It was not designed to assure that identities and such as credentials and data were protected from nation state adversaries. And so if you're a company that is in the social marketing area where you're trying to get the word out and you don't really have any secrets, then Microsoft 365 plain vanilla is right for you. There really is no better platform when it comes to knowledge worker productivity. But if you have any sort of critical intellectual property, probably not the best choice, because there's several different threats that I'm talking about here. So number one, we spoke about the sophisticated adversaries, right? The folks who are using attacks like we went through with the DarkHalo explanation. Plus, you've got global administrators. They can serve as an attack vector, and we'll talk about more about that in a minute. Next slide, please, Evan. So in this environment of work from anywhere, we see the increased burden for endpoint hygiene and even home network hygiene. If we think about some of the sophisticated attacks that take place, not only have they focused on things like the SolarWinds attack, but some of the less publicized attacks have focused on vulnerabilities in home routers and access points. Think about the devices that are on your home network and who's not working from home now because of the global health crisis. And so we've seen sophisticated organizations use vulnerabilities in those home routers and access points to become persistent and to sit there and watch and opportunistically take over devices that are on that network. We've seen iPhones attacked, we've seen corporate issued laptops attacked. And so that command and control center that exists at the home router can serve as a very interesting flex point. And if you're relying on communications capabilities like Teams and Zoom that only use SSL to protect them, those router access exploits can be used to gain access to those SSL and TLS level protected systems. And so in the event that home network components are compromised, those SSL and TLS systems are highly vulnerable. So just another quick tip here, if you haven't run a scan from Shodan to understand what kinds of IoT data is leaking, and if you've got any active exploits, highly recommend you visit Shodan, plug in the IP address of your home internet connection and take a look at see what you may be leaking there. Next slide, please. So let's talk a little bit about this outsource offshore IT admin situation. So you think about moving these IT admin jobs overseas, it makes complete financial sense for companies to do that. They can spend a fraction of the cost to basically get a pretty talented IT administrator who lives in India or Bulgaria or Philippines or wherever they may be. And so if you think about the monetary aspect of that, well, so you're paying someone a lot less. Well, that means that if you have a motivated adversary, they can go and bribe that IT admin to do things on their behalf. In one investigation that I was involved in, where it took me to India and looking particularly at a Chinese bad actor that was trying to infiltrate a US organization, the Chinese were waiting in the tea shop across the street from the IT outsourcing building. And they would sit and wait and listen to the conversations. And the key things that they were looking for were mentions by young men of trying to get married. So in the Indian culture, when you're going to get married, you sort of have to have this nest egg in order to impress the girl's father to say, yep, you can get married to my daughter. And so in one case, we saw a two-stage bribe where $25,000 was offered to the IT administrator in India to place a USB key in a particular set of servers that were racked in India, as well as some persistent code to sit in a Microsoft SQL Server database in the United States. And basically the payoff was, hey, here's $25K to place this stuff. When we get verification that it's placed, we'll give you another $25K. That's 2 years worth of salary for that young IT admin. Now, luckily, he had the integrity to come and talk to us about what was happening. And, you know, we worked with the company that I was consulting with to make sure that he was taken care of. But essentially, the cost of having an offshore IT admin become a hostile actor is very, very low. And most organizations don't have the controls in place to deal with this. Next slide, please. And so if you think about this, this is a much bigger problem. It's not just the IT admins who may be trusted. In the research that I've done over the last 10 years, I've identified 130 organizations in 30 countries that have the ability to intercept SSL and TLS communications over internet service provider links. So for example, with the whole Brexit thing that's going on right now, the European Union has been using their intercept capabilities to watch a lot of British nationals' internet traffic. So for example, on your iPhone, on your Android phone, if you go and take a look at the roots of trust that are pre-installed there, you'll see that there's a root of trust installed by a shell company in Belgium that's controlled by the European Union. And so the European Union has the ability to intercept all of the communications that they can lay their hands on to anyone who's using an iPhone or an Android device. And so by using these legacy technologies like SSL and TLS, it's not just exposing data to bad IT admins, but it's also exposing data to countries that you may think, well, oh, Belgium, they're sort of friends to Britain, right? But are they, right? They are constantly looking for ways to get an economic advantage. And so you have to have that in mind. Next slide, please. And so the new reality is we don't come into the office anymore. Our most sensitive data is no longer within on-premise data centers. And so, you know, we've been working for the last several years to bring a system to bear, which is truly zero trust, something that organizations can use to really solve the problems. And, you know, what we've done, next slide, please, Devin. We've developed this base capability that we call Secure OS. Think of it as an elimination of centralized roots of trust. So for example, Evan mentioned my colored past. At one point in my life, I ran cellular wiretaps for the US government. I listened to people's phone calls. I would try to break into encrypted communications channels. The easiest way for me to break into encrypted comms was to go and find which encryption service they were using, and then go compromise that route. And then I could print my own certs and I could do whatever I wanted to. And so eliminating that centralized root of trust is very important. The next one is you can't trust your IT admins with sensitive data, especially in highly distributed and offshore environments. You just can't do it. You know, you will not be as lucky as the organization I consulted with, where that ethical young Indian employee comes and says, hey, I just got offered 25 grand to put this USB key in. And so you want to have controls in place that eliminate the potential for admins to access data. And you also want to eliminate the reliance on provider encryption keys or simple bring your own key situations that are offered by the likes of Box and OneDrive and Dropbox and that sort of thing. You want to have true, what I call encryption sovereignty over what you're working on. And what that does is it assures that you control the integrity of the information and absolute control over access, who has access to it. So those are the things that I wanted to cover today. Unfortunately, we have burned through our time right now. And so just taking a quick look at any open questions, I don't see any in the Q&A window. But if you would like to engage about, you know, knowing more about this DarkHalo research, how it impacts enterprises, Also, I have significant amount of experience in the operational technology world. I spent the last 20 years doing hacking in the OT SCADA systems world. I've spent a significant amount of time with one of our largest customers implementing our security controls to protect manufacturing and industrial control information. And so happy to engage as you see appropriate. So Evan, I'll turn the time back over to you.
Oh, thank you, Aaron. As always, when I listen to you talk about some of these recent hacks, especially DarkHalo, I'm scared but hopeful, and hopeful because there is a solution. And as Aaron mentioned, HighSide has developed a technology that allows organizations to engage the way that their users need to engage, to operate their business the way that a modern organization needs to run, but to do so securely. HighSide enables organizations to securely store and share files in the cloud without a single point of failure. Using an end-to-end encrypted and distributed trust architecture, your data is secure. We allow organizations to collaborate around that sensitive data, to chat, to share, to conduct video calls, to mark up documents, and to pass those materials back and forth between their own internal employees as well as within across their partner communities in a secure and compliant manner. We allow organizations to do so in an on-prem environment or in a hosted environment, both equally secure, but depending on your compliance requirements and internal security mandates, we give you that flexibility. And lastly, we leverage the authentication capabilities within the end-to-end encryption, distributed end-to-end encryption management layer to broker access to additional third-party platforms as well as internal network environments. We do this through 4 product offerings, all built on the same code base, all running on that secure OS that Aaron talked about, as well as you can find content around on our website. Secure Collab is a collaboration environment, straightforward. Secure Drive is a cloud file sharing and storage solution. Again, straightforward. Secure Access is a distributed multi-factor authentication tool on the easiest side to understand, but it's also can be the single factor, primary factor for access management to all platforms, eliminating the insecurity of passwords, two-factor codes, and the potential for compromise at the server level. And lastly, for those organizations already running Microsoft Teams, which is a lot of you, we've partnered with Microsoft and developed and are the only authorized and approved encryption application integrated into the, Microsoft Teams, which is available via the App Store and has an easy deployment framework, allowing you to inject encrypted comms right into the existing Microsoft Teams environment for both data, files, and message content. And HighSide, for those of you who don't know a lot about us, we're a global organization. We've been in business for a long time now, since early 2015, so over 6 years. And we're trusted by some of the leading government organizations as well as enterprise companies around the world. But we work across the stack of industry and across the size portfolio of all organizations. And now I'm rushing through this, and I'm sorry we don't have time for questions today because we're already a minute over our time. We will get to those questions. A bunch of questions came in, Aaron, for you after you wrapped there. But we wanted to make an offer to everybody here in attendance today. And so I'll lead off with Ian's offer. So NDC is offering a free no cost, no strings attached, 2701 gap analysis to all organizations here in attendance today, which is pretty darn exciting. And HighSide is offering free 30 days of our secure drive, free 45 days of our secure collaboration, and 90 days free of our secure Teams environment. We will be following up with each of you and giving you more information via email on how to take advantage of these offers. But I really want to thank my panelists, Ian and Aaron, for their insight, the time that they put into their content today. And I really want to thank everybody here in attendance this afternoon for taking time out of your day. I know we're all busy, and I know we're all Zoom fatigued, PowerPointed out. So thank you again for your attention and for your time. We're going to be doing more of these sessions, focusing in on different parts of the insecurity of modern digital business applications, so that you can be more educated on the challenges facing your users, your organization, your data security programs, but also, more importantly, so you can have a better understanding of how to solve those challenges with different processes that can be implemented, as well as technology. And certainly here at HighSide, that is our goal, to build technology to enable you, to enable the modern business, to enable the digital workforce, to engage, to share, to collaborate, and to access the materials and the data they need to do their jobs effectively, no matter where they are in the world, but to keep you as an organization secure and compliant. So again, I thank you for your time today. That concludes our webinar. We will be sending out the recording for you to watch at your leisure. And please feel free to share that out to your industry peers, colleagues, and others. Have a great rest of the week and enjoy your weekend in lockdown, whatever country you are in. I'm sure you're under lockdown like the rest of the world. Try to have some fun, take a breath, and enjoy the peace and quiet over the weekend. Have a great day.